Hey guys, so today we're going to talk about cell energy. So a term that you'll hear often in relationship to energy and cells is metabolism. And metabolism is just a way of describing all of the chemical reactions that are occurring inside an organism to keep it alive and functioning. So that's all. And so if you're alive, you need to have some form of metabolism. Metabolism is a way of getting and using energy. And one of the things that we talk about in relationship to energy, especially in biology, so energy in biology, is going to be this molecule called ATP. So ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate. So ATP. And adenosine triphosphate is just what it kind of sounds like. So it's an adenosine attached to 3 phosphates. And it's actually really useful for carrying around just enough energy for the cell to use to power a lot of its functions. And what actually ends up happening is that ATP gets converted to ADP, which is adenosine diphosphate. That other phosphate gets plucked off. And when that bond is broken, you release energy. And you can use that energy to do stuff. Then when you have energy, you can store it back into ATP. So there's this kind of like recharging of a battery that goes on. So how do we get that ATP? Well, one of the ways that you get the ATP is through cellular respiration. Basically, cellular respiration is how you make ATP from your food. And all organisms have some form of cellular respiration. So all living things have some form of cellular respiration. Which is kind of amazing when you think about it. Now, the general formula for cellular respiration, and this is actually the general formula for something called aerobic cellular respiration. I'll get a little bit more into that in a second. You have glucose, which is C6H12O6, plus oxygen. Again, this is the aerobic kind. So that's O2, oxygen gas. Reacts to form carbon dioxide. So these are going to react and you're going to get CO2, water, which is H2O, and ATP, which is energy. So the whole real purpose here is to get all of these ATP at the end. And for those of you who like some balance, I'm going to balance this equation. I'll put my 6's in here. So essentially what you're doing is breaking this glucose down and releasing the energy that was stored in those bonds. So let's take a little bit of a closer look at that, right? So we're going to start off with glucose, which is essentially a 6-carbon sugar. And so those little circles are going to represent your carbons, right? And you're going to, the first step of this process is something called glycolysis. So you might remember that term lysis is to break down. So in glycolysis, you go through a few steps, and what you end up doing is breaking that glucose into 2 3-carbon sugars, or 2 3-carbon molecules. And these are what we call pyruvates. So you make 2 pyruvates or pyruvic acids. Right, so you went from 1 glucose to 2 pyruvates. Now, this process actually occurs in the cytoplasm, so this is all happening in the cytoplasm. And it also is the first step of cellular respiration for everything on the planet. So it's all organisms start off with this, like this process, which is also kind of amazing if you think about it. Now from here, we kind of diverge into 2 separate kind of pathways. So there's 2 options. Do you have oxygen or do you not have oxygen? So if there's oxygen present, then you have something called aerobic cellular respiration. A-E-R-O-B-I-C. Aerobic, like you do aerobics, you need to breathe really deeply, or at least I do. That's aerobic cellular respiration. And that's the one that we're normally thinking about when we talk about cellular respiration. But not all organisms have the mechanisms or organelles or enzymes or the oxygen to perform aerobic cellular respiration. And so if your oxygen is absent, many organisms, or some organisms, are going to go into something called anaerobic respiration. So anaerobic is no oxygen, also called oops, I almost spelled that wrong. F-E-R-M-E-N-T. Sorry, sometimes I have to spell things out loud. So anaerobic respiration, also known as fermentation. And there's a few types of fermentation that you probably know about. And if not, you're going to know about them now. So one occurs in yeast. And they break down those pyruvates into alcohol and carbon dioxide. So yeast do something called alcohol fermentation, which is just what it sounds like. They break down those sugars and generate alcohol and carbon dioxide. The other type of fermentation is lactic acid fermentation. And this one's interesting. It occurs so bacteria do it. And when they do it, we use it to make things like yogurt and cheese. One of my favorite things. Oops, sorry, you can't see what I'm writing. Yogurt and cheese. Another organism that does lactic acid fermentation are humans or animals. And for us, the result is not as nice as yogurt and cheese. This actually results in muscle fatigue. So if you're exercising and you use up all of the available oxygen, the cells will switch to anaerobic respiration. And the issue there is that sometimes that lactic acid can build up in muscle tissue. So this is not the preferred method. Now, here, after you've gone through this, you actually are already starting to get some energy. So this whole process, you net gain 2 ATPs and 2 of something called NADH. Oops. And this is a little bit of energy, but it's not a ton. Anaerobic respiration actually doesn't result in any more energy for the organism, but it allows you to go back through glycolysis. So this is okay, but it doesn't really give you a ton of energy. What does end up giving you a ton of energy is this aerobic cellular respiration. And this happens in the mighty mitochondria. So I'm not going to get into all of the details of this, but basically what happens inside of your mitochondria, so here's your mitochondria. Just kind of got all those folds going on. You have, grab a marker for this one. So you have 2 things that are going to happen. So again, this is the mitochondria. Sorry. And what you end up doing is having these pyruvates come in. So the pyruvate comes in, and that goes into something called the Krebs cycle. And that gets broken down, and you end up releasing some CO2. So that's where that CO2 comes from. The O2 is necessary for something called the electron transport chain. So the Krebs cycle occurs, and this makes some molecules that are electron carriers. They're going to be called NADH. That might look familiar from over here. This also is going to head over to this electron transport chain. And something called FADH2. Yeah, and these are just like chemistry terms. They're basically taking some energy, bringing it over to this electron transport chain. Don't have to worry too much about that. What is important is that this is the part that needs the oxygen. So the oxygen goes in, and at the end you have water coming out, but you also get about 32 ATPs. So per glucose, you get about 36 to 38 ATPs. Now this is like ideal conditions, but you get a bunch of energy from that process. So that's just a quick overview of cellular respiration and metabolism. Come on back for part 2, where I will talk about how we actually get that glucose and how the energy gets in there in the first place. But take a quick break first.